This is Mark getting his chest caved in. And this is his dad saving him some dentist appointment. And this is his dad's friends giving him years of therapy bills. For a guy called Invincible, he gets hospitalized a lot, which made me curious. How much would Mark owe in medical bills if he actually had to pay them? Well, today, I'm going to figure out the exact number, adding up everything from minor treatments that cost a few grand all the way to surgeries that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The first time we see Mark really getting injured is in his battle against Machine Head's thugs in episode 5 of season 1. See, after his success in the Mars mission Cecil sent him on, Mark's feeling confident in himself and his abilities. So when Titan shows up with a sob story and a demand, Mark gives in pretty easily. Reckless as he is young though, Mark just bursts in with no plan and gets ambushed by Machine Head's hired mercenaries.
Oh shit.
Mercenaries which include Battle Beast, the physical embodiment of rage and bloodlust, who's been traveling the universe for a challenge. And while the others aren't much to Mark, Battle Beast destroys him. Right off the bat, Battle Beast's mace slams him 20 meters into the sky. Fractured ribs aside, he gets his head bashed in by this rail on his way down, hard enough to draw blood, which it'll at least be a concussion, minor skull fracture, and internal bleeding that needs to be evacuated. Then the furry menace slams his head into the floor, worsening the skull fracture from before, and putting him in need of neurological monitoring that'll take another $6,000 to $10,000. Then there's another stomp to the skull, a punch and knee to the stomach, a double-handed slam to the spine, and a kick to the torso, devastating his insides and crushing his vertebrae, or at least fracturing a good few. After packing up the new Guardians as well just for fun, Battle Beast goes right back to Mark, crushing his foot under one of his own, most definitely breaking it, and then a full torso crush with his mace that shatters several ribs and punctures his lungs, leaving Mark struggling to breathe. Finally, the internal bleeding means he'll need multiple units of blood, 3 to 4 units at $700 each, plus hospital fees running him around $2,500 to $3,000. And in the condition his body's in, there's no way he could be transported safely or fast enough in anything less than an air ambulance evacuation, which is a whole other cost. Air medical transport runs around $30,000 to $40,000 depending on distance. In total, if we assume the best possible care was provided for all of Mark's treatment, the combined total of this battle alone comes out to a whopping $626,000. That's over $500,000 in bills from just one beatdown, and we're nowhere near done just yet. After the Battle Beast beating, Mark's next major set of injuries actually comes courtesy of his own father in the finale of season 1. After realizing his dad's actually a whack job who's only on Earth to conquer it, Mark steps into the fight against Omni-Man himself, and boy does he regret it. Now, for most of the early battle, Omni-Man's just blocking Mark's attacks and smacking him around like a misbehaving child, his heart not really in it. It's only when their fight takes them to Chicago that Mark actually bleeds, after being tossed through multiple buildings and skidding over miles of gravel. Based on the blood, that's at least a minor concussion, which means a $10,000 bill for CT scans and neurological monitoring. And let's throw in $500 for packing and cauterizing that nosebleed while we're at it. Omni-Man only goes harder after this though, slamming Mark through concrete in the subway, upgrading his concussion to a subdural hematoma, slap on another CT scan, and $110,000 to get the blood out. Then, after the train scene, which is probably the least physically harmful thing Mark goes through in this fight, Nolan launches a haymaker straight into his spine. The spinal CT and MRI to properly understand the damage from that alone would run $18,000, and then there's almost 10 times that for spinal fusion surgery, landing at $150,000. As if the kid hadn't had enough already, Omni-Man uses him as a personal piñata through the skies, causing extensive skull damage and internal bleeding that'll need a $110,000 craniotomy, more CT scans, and $10,000 for ward monitoring. Ever the loving father, Nolan decides to give Mark a bath in the middle of all this. But with Mark unconscious, that means seawater inhalation, aspiration pneumonia, and infection. Between antibiotics, x-rays, and monitoring, that's another $11,000. Finally, Omni-Man bashes his son's sternum in, going for a double pneumothorax and possible heart damage from the broken ribs. Rack on another $500 x-ray, $10,000 chest tube placement, and $140,000 exploratory surgery. With all the face punches he's taken at this point, Mark's eye becomes bruised and sunken, which likely means an orbital floor fracture. Without blowing $112,000 on urgent surgical repair, he's not using that thing again. Finally, in Omni-Man's last fit of rage, Mark loses several teeth, fractures his maxillary bone, breaks his nose, and dislocates his jaw. And of course, once again, he's gonna need an air ambulance to get transported to a hospital. Once all's said and done, Mark's hospital bills for this fight alone come out to about $836,000. and his overall Season 1 bill crosses over $1 million, hitting $1,462,000. And that brings us to Season 2, where Mark actually holds his own a lot better than before. He still gets hurt here and there, like when he's beat down by the Mauler tribe in Episode 1, or when the Depth Dweller screams at the anti-Viltrumite frequency in Episode 2, but nothing quite as bad as Season 1, not nearly enough to be hospitalized in any case. That is, until the Battle of Thraxa. In Episode 4, Mark finally finds where his father's been for the past several months, on the planet Thraxa, rediscovering himself and his values, as well as raising a new family. Unfortunately, their reunion's cut short by the arrival of Viltrumite invaders, here to hunt down Nolan for defecting from the Empire. While Nolan fights off the main forces, Mark escorts Nolan's new wife and their child to safety, only to come face to face with one of the Viltrumites, Lucan. And unsurprisingly, Mark gets bodied. Between the initial face punch and the following finger crush to the skull, he's already taken severe skull and possibly brain damage, not to mention tearing of the brain's protective layers and internal bleeding. Luckily, Nolan shows up in time to take care of Lucan, and the father-son duo rush back to where the Viltrumites are coming from. There, they face another duo. Once again, they separate to fight their own battles, and Mark's left to the mercy of the particularly vicious Thula. After being interrupted by Nolan, Thula gets up first and slams a kick upwards into Mark's face, breaking his nose and knocking out a tooth or two. At this point, Nolan cuts in again, gives Mark a pep talk about how he either hits to kill or dies, and goes back to his own fight. Thanks to Mark's hesitation though, Thula pummels him again, punching him all over his torso and flying across the sands of Thraxa. On top of that, she lands several cuts with her braid blade, leaving Mark with open wounds prone to infection. At this point, Mark finally locks in and starts fighting back, even gaining ground on her. But when he's finally got her by the skull, ready to finish her off, he hesitates, and in that moment, Thula stabs him dead center in the gut with her braid blade, cutting deep enough to go through his abdomen and putting him out of the fight. Finally, Mark would again need air ambulance transport to a hospital capable of handling multiple severe traumas. In total, that brings the damages from this battle to a still heavy but much lighter than usual bill of roughly $250,500. And luckily for Mark, that's the last major beatdown he takes for a good long while. Not so luckily though, the next one is quite possibly the worst he's ever had to suffer through. While dealing with the aftermath of the Invincible War, the world's still coming to terms with what it just went through. An even greater threat arrives. The mad dog of the Viltrum Empire, the executioner, Conquest. Though he's sent to determine why Mark hasn't gotten Earth to submit yet, Conquest's just there to run the fade and get his rocks off by bashing someone's brains out. Upon landing on Earth, he goes straight for Invincible, and the two launch right into an all-out battle. Throughout the early stages of the fight, Mark actually holds his own, even drawing first blood without taking any significant injuries himself. However, once they're back down from the stratosphere, Conquest decides to start cutting loose. In one swift move, he punches Mark in the face hard enough to break his nose. Knocked out by the massive blow, Mark crashes to Earth and lands in a crater, spitting up blood, implying significant internal injuries. Before he can gather himself, Conquest comes crashing down into him to take Mark on a terrifying ride. He sends Mark flying through the city just like Nolan did all those months ago, causing severe bruising, contusions, and multiple fractures all over the body. And with every single major fracture running him 30K, that's rough. The following oil tanker explosion would exacerbate burns and soft tissue trauma. Before Mark has the chance to get up, Conquest grabs him by the throat and slams him into the ground, causing tracheal damage. If that needs actual surgical repair, it'll run another 12 grand. From there, Conquest continues to dog-walk Mark through the city until Mark catches him off guard with a sudden headbutt, giving both of them a concussion. Once they take to the sky again, Conquest grabs Mark by the wrist and spins him around hard enough to dislocate his shoulder and fracture his arm in multiple places. If that wasn't enough, he proceeds to use Mark's body as a surfboard over the city streets, giving him severe abrasions on the back. Later, Conquest catches Mark off guard with a lower thigh chop that breaks his femur in half, leaving the bone protruding in an especially gruesome display. Getting that thing back in place alone is going to be $35,000, not to mention x-rays and transfusions. Finally, upon seeing Eve die, Mark charges at Conquest with no regard for himself. He crushes his fist against Conquest's robotic arm and breaks his own ulna in half, just like his femur. Finally, after bashing Conquest's skull in, Mark's remaining good hand is caught and crushed, all his fingers bent the wrong way. And finally, at the end of this fight, Mark would once again need air ambulance transport to a hospital equipped for multiple severe traumas. Tallying all that up, the total for Mark's fight against Conquest comes up to roughly $228,750. Still a massive number, but nowhere near the extensive damage from Mark's first beatdown, courtesy of Battle Beast. Still, this brings the combined total of all the hospital bills Invincible would owe to a jaw-dropping, bank-emptying, depression-inducing $1,941,250 US. So, in conclusion, conclusion, no, the teenage superhero with no real job would absolutely not be able to pay his own medical bills, not unless the economy collapses at least, and hey, that doesn't seem too far off.